We continue the shir in Sichos HaRan, the sayings of wisdom of Rabbi Arizal. We're in paragraph Sif Samach Beis, paragraph 62. Rabbi Arizal says, Da. Many times Rabbi Arizal begins with the word Da. Da means you should know. You should know means you don't know. You're being notified, you should know that this is a direct cablegram from the Olam HaAtzilus, cablegram from heaven with this message, not the heaven where the angels are, higher, not the heaven where the throne of Hashem is, higher, the heaven above Atzilus, the highest of the heavens. This message comes from there. Menachem says, know this fact that the human being is the lowest of all these creations, because this world that we are in now, Olam HaAsiyah, is by far the lowest world. Can you compare a human being to an angel? Compare the powers or the size, any type of dimension. The angels are so much greater, so much more in volume, so much larger measure than all of this earthly universe. And yet, as mentioned many times, the purpose of creation was not for the sake of the angels, not for the sake of the heavens, not for the sake of the planets, but for the sake of this smallest central integral point of creation, this planet Earth. This planet Earth too, not for the sake of the multitude of animals, four-footed and two-footed, but for the sake of the Atem Hamiyat, lesser number, the smallest nation on earth, the Jewish nation, the chosen, selected ones of Hashem. And this human being that Hashem created, Hashem has given into this human being such powers too that human himself is hardly aware of what he possesses. We're speaking now physically, human beings' physical, mental powers. The same as spiritually. Speak about the Spheres, the heavenly Spheres, the 10 Spheres. There are 3 upper ones, Chachma, Bina, Das, and the 7 lowest Spheres, starting with Chesed to Malchus. Whatever they stand for, they are spiritual items far above us. But also, too, correspondingly, the human being, the physiology of human being is, he too is divided into 2 parts. The upper section, the mental part, which to the brain has 3 sections, Chachma, Bina, and Das, 3 types of wisdom. And then the physical part, below, the organs which carry out the actions. So in other words, in a human being you have thought, planning, and you have carrying out physically the action, thought and action. Menachem says that the thought, just like in the Spheres, in Kedusha, spiritually, the thought is so much higher than the action, so too, the mentality of a person, though it seems to be inoperative, immobile, physically unable to perform any act, yet it is far greater, higher, and more powerful than the physical organs of a person, even in a physical sense. For example, a person would like to lift a weight. The weight is 100 pounds, dead weight. This person physically is weak. There's no way he can lift this 100-pound dead weight. No way whatsoever. It's an impossibility for him. But if he has a brain, he figures out a means. In his mind, he figures out a plan to use leverage or to use other methods by which this weight can be lifted. We see, for example, the amazing size and weight of the rocks, stones, in the old city of Yerushalmi, especially by the Kaisel. Without machinery, how were those weights lifted? It took human beings to lift them. And of course, this was due to the wisdom, planning, which was superior to those possessed by humans today. No one today can figure out, smartest brains among the dumbest scientists cannot figure out how those stones were lifted to such a high point, so far above the ground. This is a simple example. We're going deeper than this. Rabbi Nachman says that the human being does not know the power of his mind. Hashem created the human mind with such hidden powers that a person can perform what we might consider, we might deem as miracle powers, miracle acts. For example, a person, by concentrating deeply on something which is completely remote, unrelated to himself, say for example stocks, the stock market. He'd like to have a stock rise, go up in price, to make sort of a killing in the market. How can he do it without contacting a broker, without performing any physical act whatsoever? He goes into a sort of trance. We don't mean that literally. If he goes into a deep concentration, and he centers his mind completely on this thought that the price of this stock should rise, and with that concentration, undisturbed by any outside force whatsoever, if the concentration is a perfect one, it is possible for a person to even have the stock price go up. This is a unusual case. There are much simpler cases that we could point out to. Arizal brings elsewhere that a person can stand in front of a firing squad. How do you employ mental telepathy to something which is not alive? Firing squads stand there with rifles. The person could stand looking at that rifle and will the rifle not to shoot. Now this sounds fictitious, Chas v'sholom. It is not. It is absolute fact. Menachem says that the human being does have such mental powers if he would only employ it. A person would practice, would exercise his mind to the highest capability of concentration. This must be pure concentration. He can actually dictate to a gun not to fire. And so many other phases, many other fields, this can be done because of the power of the mentality, the mental powers of a human being. Menachem says this sounds simple. Sounds very easy, because this means that a person can say, in that case, I now control the world with my mind. My mind is such that I can control the entire world. He forgets that his is not the only mind in the world. Many minds working in different directions and that clash. That's first of all. Secondly, especially if a person's mind is that weak that he cannot concentrate his mind fully, and surely it is not effective at all. For example, you want to concentrate completely. That means you have no outside thought on an item like the stock market. How about concentrating on something much more important? Speaking to Hashem. Could you concentrate for 3 or 4 minutes, or 5 minutes, as long as it takes you to say the Shemona Esrei, your davening, Shachris, Menachem Mendel? Concentrate for those few minutes, a very short period of time, without allowing any thought whatsoever to penetrate your mind during the time you're speaking to Hashem. And a person who is truthful, who is honest, will admit that he could not recall one single tefillah where he honestly had no outside thought, even for a fleeting moment. His mind really concentrated on this tefillah. We once gave a mashal, we have it in fact in one of the past shiurim recently. It pays to repeat it again. One of the great tzaddikim once took his yeshiva students, the head of the yeshiva took his students out and said, I'm going to show you a lesson today. We're going out of the yeshiva. They asked, where? He said, we're going to the circus. We're going to the circus? Isn't that bittul Torah? The yeshiva should stop learning and go to the circus. You don't see nice things there. He said, we're going to the circus just for one single act. A very important act. He came to the circus and it was time. They walked inside just as the aerialist, a high wire artist, would walk the high wire above the ground, a few hundred feet above the ground, without a net below. And this walk on top, of course, was very dangerous. It could be fatal if he made the slightest misstep. Students were told to watch. They were enthralled by the sight. It was fascinating to watch, but it wasn't as fascinating as learning lahavdil a piece of Gemara, a difficult kasha Gemara. What was the purpose of leaving their studies to go look at this sight? Not fit for yeshiva students. But the Rebbe had said, the yeshiva said, go watch. They did. As soon as this was over, he said, we now leave. It was a very short visit to the circus. They came back. He said, now you get a shiur. He said, what did you learn from that high wire act? They thought about it. They couldn't figure any moral lesson. The person was crazy. Or that there is danger in heights. He didn't have agoraphobia. He told them, you didn't get the main point of this lesson. Here's a case. This person you saw was not insane. On the contrary. He's much better than you are. Because this person, one misstep for a fraction of a second could cost him his life. Therefore, what he needed was absolute concentration. For the entire 3 minutes he was walking that tightrope. Absolute concentration without allowing his mind to wander for a moment. You have just witnessed a case where it is possible for a person to go for 3 minutes with an intense concentration without a let-up. Now you try and emulate that. Perform the same act when you're walking a tight rope, standing before Hashem, which is much more dangerous because you're speaking to Hashem. You turn away from Hashem for a moment. You let your mind wander. Where's the respect standing before the King of Kings? Imagine how dangerous that is. More than just a life. That could be the soul in peril. But it is possible to concentrate. You've seen proof from this tightrope walk. So therefore, we do see that there is that possibility, yet how many people really do perform this act of true concentration? The Arizal says this is the potential power in the person's mental capacity, but it is very rarely ever used. Now we find, the Arizal says that the person who tries, but does not completely succeed in concentrating, can sometimes lose out. The example we had, the Gemara says that, the first king of the Jews, the 10 tribes of Yedavam ben Avat. Yedavam ben Avat was a chayte umachti, he committed sins himself, worshipping idols. He misled the Jews, the 10 tribes, also to worship idols. And therefore the Gemara says that he is the worst sinner of all. He goes to Gehenna for good. What was his father like? The Gemara says his name was Nevot. Was his name really Nevot? Yedavam ben Nevot. Was that his real name, Nevot, or was that a nickname? The Gemara says Nevot means a spark. Nevot means a spark. His father committed a grave error because his father concentrated, and his concentration wasn't a fully clear one. And what he saw was that it came from himself a spark, unusual sight. He said he derived himself, this must mean that he's going to become king. Spark of fire, this is a miracle. This means it must portend the fact that he's going to become king of the Jews. Therefore, he, Nevot, whose real name was Sheva, went out and rebelled against David HaMelech, against King David. And this caused his own downfall. You recall that story we had at the Navi. His error, his mistake was that he did not concentrate enough to see that this message meant to say, from him there shall come forth a king. His son will be king, not he himself. He destroyed himself because of mistaken interpretation of what he saw. This was due to the fact that there was not a full concentration. He did not use his mental powers properly. So in a word there, the Menel says that the mental powers of a person are such that they are very beneficial. If you can use it to make the stock market prices go up, fine. You can't do that. There are other things that each person could do. Much more important. Number one, Menel says, is in the study of Torah. A person can use his powers of concentration first for the study of Torah itself, to learn to study Torah deeply, to delve deeply into the deepest recesses and the secrets of Torah, and then again, with deep concentration, a person can form a resolve, a resolution, that he's going to cover a stipulated amount of learning. Ordinarily, he would consider it an impossibility to cover Shas, let's say, in a short period of time, to cover all 4 Shulchan Aruchs in a given short period of time. Let's say, for example, to cover all 4 Shulchan Aruchs in one single year. All 4 Shulchan Aruchs in 1 year, that's 1,700 chapters in Shulchan Aruch. And Chaim, Yeridea, Ebenezer, Chesed Mishpat, how can you cover that in 1 year? The answer is that if a person concentrates means he resolves in his mind, absolute resolution, all the power in his mental capacity that he's going to cover this amount, this 1 year, he definitely will succeed. Same thing holds true for anything else, for Shas, for the Rishonim, for Navi, for even deeper studies, Kabbalah, and so on. A person with deep concentration can win out, if it's firm enough, can win out in this determination to cover so much study during one single year. This is hinted at in the Gemara, Sanhedrin, which says that Machshava Mayil Afilu L'Divrei Torah. The Gemara says there that thought, Machshava, thought, plan, helps even for the study of Torah. That's the words of the Gemara. The Menel says this means that a person thinks deeply, concentrates with all his power, that he's going to learn so much it will help him to succeed. However, we find though, note that Rashi HaKodesh, on that Gemara, interprets and translates the words differently. Rashi HaKodesh says there, the meaning of those words is that Machshava helps, even for Divrei Torah. He says Machshava helps to nullify the negative sense, to do harm. A person says, I'm going to learn 10 pages of Gemara today. The fact that he said that, he's going to find that he will not be able to succeed. You're supposed to say, I'm going to learn as much as possible, I'll do everything I can to cover as much ground as possible, but if he says, I'm going to make 10 pages, he will invariably fail to cover his planned amount. Machshava, he planned, Machshava is Belavish, he planned and the plans go awry. So we see, in a sense, it would seem that there is a difference, a direct contradiction. Direct opposite of what the Arizal said. The Arizal says there's no kasha, because both interpretations are correct. Both interpretations are Elu Divrei Kim Chayim. Both the word of Hashem, and Rashi HaKodesh spoke with Ruach HaKodesh, which is a heavenly gift, a heavenly interpretation. Rabbi Arizal's words are all heavenly. Both are correct. Now, to answer this in a very simple form, it would seem seems that there is no conflict in these two statements. Rashi Kodesh says a person who plans, a person who makes plans to learn a certain amount, he's not sure of himself, he plans to do it, and of course the Satan will stand by and laugh at him. You make these plans, you don't know how good you are, and I'll show you that I'll stop you. I'll raise obstacles and stop you from learning. Whereas if he wouldn't have challenged the Satan with this, he might have been able to cover that amount. Arizal speaks about it not as a plan, but as a concentration, a concentrated effort. If he concentrates that hard, his concentration is so strong and so potent, he can defeat even the Satan. Yisrael. The Jew can overpower the angel himself. So if his concentration is that pure and that deep, he rises to the Sfira of Chachma. With that wisdom, he can even overpower all the obstacles set up by the Satan, by the Zohar, and he will succeed. There is no stira between these two. Arizal says in every country or every land, there is something that's considered special in that land. And as soon as that item comes to the fore, as soon as it becomes revealed, there is good in it and there is evil in it. And in everything a person has to be careful if he takes himself to it. If he wants to participate in it, be very careful in selecting. Now, for example, Arizal gives a different example. We'll take that soon, just to make it a little clearer. Let's say, for example, in this country we have something became very famous and very popular, the field of computing. Just a few years ago, this was practically unknown. And a person who wanted to succeed in business or employment would have to seek a different field of employment. Suddenly this became very valuable, very popular. Anybody who enters into this field will be a success. Anybody, meaning of course at least a normal person, will be successful because this field is one that's blessed with success. So a person must then know that pick the item which has hatzlacha. There is something in each land, and he will have a much better chance of being a sliach. Same as the Gemara says. If you want to succeed in business, get yourself a partner who has mazel. Take a person who's very successful in business, not necessarily brains. It's more luck than brains. But luck meaning, of course, blessings from heaven, a mazel. And this person who has this blessing, attach yourself to him, you too will derive from his mazel. Become a partner with one who has this luck, like the ones who attached to Eiv, they became rich too. Arizal says now, at that time, or this of course is something which exists throughout, is a Baal Shem. Baal Shem means one who is considered a tzadik to a degree, a tzadik or a Hasidic Rebbe, the head of a dynasty of Chassidim. It's very popular to be a Hasidic Rebbe today, as it was then. The person who becomes a Hasidic Rebbe generally stands to, for one thing, to make a good living, to live a good life because he has followers who will do his bidding. It's better than being employed by someone else and having to obey his employer's bidding. So it's something which is beneficial for the person, and it's something which is successful. We see that in this country, in these countries, this item does exist. The point is, the question is, how do you become Baal Shem? How do you get this title? How do you get this popularity? How do you get people to believe in you? The answer is, the secret is to first form a clique. Get those with a lower mentality, ones that you can persuade easily, influence them mentally to believe in you, And once you have this nucleus, then the others will automatically follow. People will see that so many already believe in this Rebbe, so there must be something to it. Even those who are wise will follow too. The easiest ones, of course, to influence are women, because they're very gullible. You can get women to believe in you easily, and then once you have the women, men follow the women. The two is when men are gullible. So this is the Eitzah for something like this. Menachem says, you think this is good. Of course, this is far from good, because this means that a person could be going on a completely wrong path. And naturally, Menachem says, he ends with these words, Hashem Yisborach Yigala Ha'emes M'Heidei V'Elomein. Hashem should reveal the truth to us. Why does he add these words? Because usually, most cases, these leaders, these spiritual leaders, are not sincere. They are not that they are fraudulent only, but the fact that their motive is not a sincere one. They seek kavod, they seek honor, they seek glory, and they themselves at first know that they are not truly leaders. They do not possess these pure spiritual powers. They mislead a public into following them by donning this mantle, this cloak of greatness, of a Talmud Chacham, a Rebbe, a tzadik. And of course the worst penalty for that is that eventually, biggest tragedy for themselves, eventually they begin to believe it themselves, that they are that great. That's the most self-destructive step possible. If they actually believe they are tzaddikim, that of course is the step before the fall, the crash. And that's why a person should be very careful in selecting a field. You see that there is a very lucrative field, for example, becoming a tzaddik, then select wisely. First, seek the truth. Are you fit for that field or not? In case it comes to computing, for example, even a half moron could enter into it and be successful. Besides, there's no danger in it, no danger of self-delusions. This is the most important step of all. To seek the truth, and then to know that that which is popular, that which is popular has a certain muzzle to it, where a person can much more easily make a living or succeed there than going into a field which has no popularity at all. This, of course, needs more elaboration, but a person thinking deeply about it would understand more. Menachem says now further that the case of is a sort of interrelated to a degree. If you see a person who holds a high position, let's say politically, a person is a mayor, a governor, a person is a prime minister of a Jewish state, a person is a king, the king of the Jews, do not feel that this person must be great. Otherwise, he would not have this position. It does not prove anything. It is possible, of course, that he is great, but at the same time, it is also possible that he got this position not because of his greatness, but because of an act on the part of his forefather, his father or grandfather or great-grandfather, which was so great, so good an act, so good a deed, that for this he deserved to have the kingdom or this leadership for himself and for his descendants. So you really cannot tell if this leader, this head of state, has achieved this on his own, or whether he inherited this through a mitzvah or a good act by his ancestor. At the same time, if you see, this too is an amazing point, if you see that a person loses this position, here he was president and suddenly he was dethroned, is it because of his own shortcoming, or could it be that he was far better and more suited for this position than his father or grandfather, yet, because of the fact that his great-grandfather performed an act that was so pure that he was blessed. He was blessed that he should have the kingdom, speaking about being a king, for example. He should be a king, he, his children, his son, his grandson, and great-grandson. 4 generations should retain the kingdom. But that's as far as his mitzvah goes. After the 4th generation, the mitzvah stops and the kingdom ceases to remain in his family. So the 4th generation, even though the person is a fitting person, is good, but because it was already decreed previously, the kingdom should remain just up to 4 generations, he could be losing his kingdom, though he deserves it more than his predecessor. These are difficult items to calculate, and that's why Arizal says very simply, it is factual that there's no way to prove through a person's holding an exalted position that this person really deserves it. It may be due to somebody else's good deed, and it may be that his losing his position is not due to his evil deed or to his shortcomings, but due to something that was done previously. Arizal says there are people who suffer tragedies in their lives, chas v'shalom. Practically everyone, chas v'chalila, goes through a tragedy. One's parent or parents pass away. Of course, that period of mourning is a very sad period. There are tears shed. There's a lot of crying, sobbing, mourning over the passing of one that is so close. And then they are forgotten to a degree. Life continues on. There are worse tragedies. The Gemara says when chas v'shalom one's mate passes away, then the whole world becomes dark for that person. The person's world is darkened. When the parent passes away, that person is occupied in his own life, especially if a person is married. They've got their own families, and they can't think constantly about the loss of this dearly beloved one. It was difficult to suffer through at the time, but it's gone. Of course, intermittently, there are memories that come up, naturally. A person doesn't really forget completely. When a person's mate, chas v'shalom, passes away, if, of course, it was a successful marriage, the Gemara says, the world becomes literally dark. There is a tragedy still worse. When it deals with a person losing a child, chas v'shalom, then that is one of the greatest tragedies possible. A woman who loses a child is called Isha Mishakela, a woman who buries her children, chas v'shalom. It is something which is an indescribable tragedy. And this is worse even than the world becoming dark. What causes this tragedy to take place? Does a child really die for the sin of the parents? Isn't there a rule, the Gemara says, that a child will not pay for the sin of the parent because the child has his own life to lead? The parents, too, will not pay for the sin of the children. Depending upon what type of sin, depending upon whether the children continue to carry out the sins of the parents. And yet, even if so, when a child is very young, speaking about literally a child, a small child, then surely it cannot be charged with its own sins, let alone the sins of the parents. So what causes the death of a child? Baal Shem HaKadosh doesn't explain, according to the Zohar Kodesh, a simple answer, very simple, that in all these cases is due to the fact that this child that you see at the age of 2, who passes away due to an illness, is really not 2 years old. That child could be a few hundred years old, or at least would be 72 years old. Because this child just came back again. This child was alive previously, recently, died at the age of 70, went to the heavenly court, stood trial, was found lacking, was found it was necessary for this child to complete a certain amount of mitzvahs, or a certain amount of additional stay on this earth. It was so little that it was deemed sufficient for this person to come back to this world, go through birth, go through the bris, go through suffering as an infant, up to the age of 2, and then with that, this neshama has completed the necessary shortcomings to supplement whatever is needed to be able to go into Gan Eden. Or if it's a later age or so on. There are so many different possibilities in this rule of Gilgulim. However, even with that, the question is, what about the parents? This child, we know, we can understand, was a Gilgul. How about these poor parents who are so grief-stricken, they've got to suffer through the death, the passing of a child? What's the reason they have to suffer with it? And 2, is there a direct action that causes this death? And is there a direct defense against it? Menachem reveals this point. Of course, before we even say it, we must make mention of the fact, make note very clearly. Many times when we have these items revealed, a person would say he now has an infallible means, the power to avoid certain types of pitfalls or tragedies. Or as we said before, the power of concentration that can perform miracles. It's true, but not everyone can employ these means. But that it helps, that is positive. In this case, the Menachem says, the death of small children is caused by a certain klipa, an evil spirit, whose name is unmentionable. The beginning of the name is a very famous name. In English they mention that name often as fools who do not know. But Arizal says you're not allowed to mention this name. The name starts with L-I-L. It's a female evil spirit who preys on children. Now, years back, much more than today, the death of infants was so large a proportion, and there was practically no means of stopping it. They attributed this to certain types of children's diseases and so on. That, of course, is a fallacy, because it's not the disease that kills. The disease itself does not kill unless the disease was sent down from heaven by Hashem to take the life of this child. So it's not the doctors who discovered the cure against it, discovered the immunization. It's because, as the Gemara says, the disease was recalled from heaven. For example, polio, was sent down to earth a certain period of time. When that period of time is over, then it was recalled. And to make it look normal, Hashem sent down into the minds of one shlump, a scientist, some kind of a immunization, a vaccine that would prevent this disease. And people blindly follow theory that the scientists are so clever and so learned and so advanced that science has become so great we don't even know ourselves the power and the greatness of these doctors and scientists. But the fact is, the Gemara says, it's not the scientists or their wisdom, it's the will of Hashem that this disease ceased to function. So there was a period of time when the deaths of children were far greater in number than they are today. Today, too, we still have a smaller proportion, literally, but it still exists. So how does a person avoid this death, at least to a degree, at least to cut down on it, to have a much better chance of saving the life of a child? This klipa, this lil, is the same letters as the word Laila, night, and Laila is the letters Yelolo. Yelolo means the moaning, crying, sobbing. Moaning and sobbing is the exact opposite of Simcha. Simcha, happiness, means where there is no crying, there is elation, there is happiness. So if a person wants to overpower this evil spirit that stands for a morbid state of mind, for crying and atzvos and sadness, a person should fill himself with a tremendous degree of simcha. With this he can drive out, expel, repel, exorcise this spirit, to get rid of it, rid his household of it, and thereby actually save the lives of his children. This is the power of simcha. And this we see, too, in the story Tikuney Zohar of the 7 bettlers, when the Arizal tells the last story of 7 bettlers, the princess which stands for the Shekhinah, which stands for the neshama of a Jew, was hurt, was wounded by 10 different poisonous arrows. These poisonous arrows penetrated into this princess, poisoned her, her life was in danger. One person, the tzadik emes, who knew the secret of the cure for these 10 different types of poison, said, I will cure her. I am curing her. What was the cure? The cure was the 10 chapters of Tehillim, Tikuney. Why are these 10 chapters so great? Because they are called the 10 kinds of negina, 10 kinds of song, which stand for simcha. So it is the power of simcha that makes these 10 chapters of Tehillim so great. Tikuney is so great, is so effective. The Tikuney, because it has these 10 different forms of negina, of song, which corresponds to the Ta'amim and the Torah, corresponds to the highest of the world, the heavenly worlds, and all because of the fact that it is simcha. It is said b'simcha. The word b'simcha, of course, is the letters machshava, again, thought or chachma, and this chachma, again, is the highest of the Sichos, representing to the Elam HaAtzilus, where these 10 chapters come from, the 10 kinds of negina, and the reason then that the princess, the emunah, which is the foundation of the Sichos, can be cured through this simcha. Then it also says that in all cases, a person can be sure that through simcha he can destroy, or at least drive out, this klipa, this female klipa that harms or even kills the children, small children. And this, of course, is also hinted at in the time of creation. Hashem created the world. The Torah tells us that the sun, the moon were changed. The moon lost its brightness. The moon became pogum, deficient in light, deficient in its form. There's a deficiency in the moon. It's called pogum. It is not completely round. It has to grow. Of course, physically it's there, but you cannot see it. The light shows it as deformed or deficient, and it increases in size, and then again begins to decrease. This pegimas halavona causes, the Gemara says, causes disease for children. This causes disease for children. This pegimas halavona too can be changed through the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana. When we say Kiddush Levana, there's a special law attached to Kiddush Levana. The most important law of all is, when you go out and say Kiddush Levana, you're supposed to go out with simcha. To say this bracha and Kiddush Levana with simcha, because through that simcha you bring about a correction, a tikkun for the Levana. Levana, of course, too, is the Malchus, the princess. Levana, the Sula, the Sas, the Mavi, the Shtemis Levana. That's the princess, the Shekhinah. Again, the neshama of a Jew. The neshama's deficiency is corrected through this tefillah, which is through simcha. And therefore, too, the child who's harmed by this deficiency is perfected, cured, through the same cure that helps the princess, which is simcha. And also the simcha is the exact opposite of this type of klipa. And simcha is the cure that can bring life. The best means of life is through simcha. Simcha is what the Arizal taught throughout. A person should live with simcha, and simcha is the true form, means of emunah. And with this simcha, brought about by a true emunah in the tzadik emes, true emunah in the words of Hashem, we should be zecher to this simcha, to this emunah, and thereby merit the zecher, the privilege of seeing with our eyes the coming of Mashiach Tikuney